Note to Pope and Congress, there are no 14th Amendment citizens. June 24, 2019 by Anna von Reitz. To all those reading this, to all Whitehats, to all members of the Roman Catholic Church including the Curia, to every world government. This is information that needs to be conveyed to the Pope and Curia, and to the members of Congress and Secretary of State Pompeo and President Trump, and to all world governments, at the earliest convenience. It also needs to be fully understood by everyone in the human rights and patriot movements worldwide. There are no 14th Amendment citizens, even though we have a letter from the US Passport Agency last week baldly stating that they consider us all 14th Amendment citizens. That's a claim that they, Mike Pompeo, the Trump administration, the Queen, and the Pope, are all going to have a hard time selling. The so-called 14th Amendment was adopted by a Scottish commercial corporation merely calling itself the United States of America Incorporated. It published its corporate constitution in 1868 as a knockoff of the actual British territorial United States Constitution. They were using this corporate by-law change misrepresented as an amendment as a ruse to recoup money they lost in the American Civil War. When Lincoln bankrupted the northern states of the original Confederacy, he took more than half of what they hoped to steal off the plate and caused no end of whining and howling in London. The vermin were restricted to making false claims in commerce only against the southern states, and the southern states were ruined by the war and mainly farmland, so slim pickings there. The Roman pontiff sided with the southern states of the original Confederacy, so these crooks arbitrarily conferred citizenship of the United States on the poor black former plantation slaves and used that as an excuse to seize upon them as property to, in effect, they re-enslaved them as public slaves to carry the public debt. This is the profoundly ugly truth of it. Black people were never set free. The whole system of slavery was simply rebranded, and went from private slave ownership to public slave ownership. These 14th Amendment citizens have been carrying the debt ever since, and the outrageous lies and claims have only expanded, to the point that these vicious con men are now claiming that we, Americans, are all 14th Amendment citizens. But 14th Amendment citizens don't exist. The Constitution that this amendment is part of was in fact the Articles of Incorporation of the United States of America, Inc., which was chartered in Scotland in 1868 and bankrupted in 1907. It was never ratified by the states and has nothing to do with the states, nor the people of this country. Obviously, a corporation does not actually have any citizens. Rather, this is a tongue-in-cheek deceit by the Roman Pontiff. All corporations are owned and operated by the Roman Pontiff and administered by the Roman Curia, so, technically, such entities are citizens of Rome prior to 1929, or now, Vatican City. This gives us the odd perspective that a corporation owing its existence to the Roman Curia, the Scottish blackguard in here secretively substituting itself for our actual government and pillaging to make up its losses in the American Civil War, attacking other corporations, also ultimately owned and operated by the Roman Curia. The only difference was the middlemen involved, the Pope v. the Union and the Queen v. the Confederate States of America. None of these entities ever claimed to represent us as the States of America, and none of our states were involved in the war, yet these European bounders used their commercial conflict, where have you heard that before, as an excuse to come ashore and pillage and plunder our people and make these outrageous false claims against us? Yet through all this maze of lies and double-speak, 14th Amendment citizens don't exist. What they are talking about is a political status, a capacity, which we may choose to undertake or not. The original municipal citizen political status was created by the Constitution of the United States and provided for Holy Roman Empire employees to be here providing essential government services, nothing more or less. The adjunct political status, citizen of the United States, was created for Negroes in the wake of the Civil War as a means of seizing upon and enslaving them to pay the debts of the Confederacy. Thus, there came to be two kinds of citizen of the United States, the original federal civil service employees and their dependents, and the new crop of slaves known as citizens of the United States, termed 14th Amendment citizens of the United States. Americans in general were never the object of the 14th Amendment, as the public discussions that took place at the time make very, very clear. The intent of the Congress in passing the measure is also clear. In their minds, they didn't mean to enslave anyone. They were trying to avoid more bloodshed and controversy. The freed Negro population needed to have some kind of political status, so the Congress conferred US citizenship on them rather than struggle with the individual states trying to make the states accept them as state citizens. The creation of a secondary, even less advantageous version of municipal citizenship, the creation of a new kind of slave status, was not the intention of the Congress that created the 14th Amendment. 2 generations of bureaucrats and the bankruptcy of the original Scottish corporation in 1907 would try to change the interpretation of the Act, but the Act still stands for what it is, proof that the way to hell is paved with good intentions, and the fact that no present-day presumption against us can be maintained on the basis of 14th Amendment citizenship. If you aren't black and aren't either working for the municipal government and/or receiving unearned welfare checks from the municipal government, you couldn't possibly be in the political status of a 14th Amendment citizen in the first place, by definition. And, obviously, the policies of a long-defunct Scottish commercial corporation merely infringing on our good name and pretending to be the United States of America have no bearing on our political statuses today. The actual, factual government occupying the land jurisdiction of this country decries this as nothing but the most venal and disgusting kind of abusive constructive fraud and organized commercial crime, all of it undertaken in breach of trust, and we lay the blame for it firmly at the feet of the Pope and the Queen and the members of Congress. Now we come to FDR and his humongous fraud, which again, involved citizens of the United States, municipal citizens. The municipal citizen political status is created and allowed by the constitutions and is administered via the Constitution of the United States, notice, no, of America, just United States. Every United States president since Washington has been sworn in as President of the Municipal United States, and FDR was no different. The present crop of con artists have based their false claims on his inaugural address, in which he offered, in the commercial sense of the word, to conscript all the municipal United States citizens and the citizens of the United States and all their property for a holy cause. This only makes sense when you realize that these people are all employed by the Pope. Our government maintains separation of church and state. So who was FDR addressing? The municipal citizens. That doesn't include us, the rest of the American public. We were not being addressed, so we had no reason or cause to reply. We hear news about Brexit on the BBC every day, but we have no cause to comment or write to members of Parliament about it. In the same way, we had no reason or obligation to agree to or rebut anything FDR said to his employees and presumed to be slaves in 1933. As we were not being addressed, and were not participating in any realm of commerce since 1868, it does not allow for any false claim that our silence equates to acquiescence or agreement to adopt the political status of citizens of the United States under a non-existent 14th Amendment to a corporate constitution adopted by a defunct Scottish commercial corporation. The same can be said of all the misaddressed mail that Americans receive, which is addressed to municipal corporations that have been named after them by the same fraud artists. Since when did John Mark Doe, the name of a Puerto Rican Sestuikvi trust, equate to the lawful person of an American state citizen called John Mark Doe? Never. In fact, if it did, their entire system would fall apart within hours, yet they still keep trying to fob off their collective entity doctrine the same way they have tried to foist off the doctrine of discovery, claiming that because some drunken sailor wearing a soup pot on his head staggered ashore and stuck a flag in the sand that any entire country already occupied by living people was somehow magically transformed into a possession of a European monarch. It's like dealing with evil children engaged in a bizarre game, and it's time for this insanity and criminality to stop. Forever. We are the parents of these entities, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Congress and the British monarchy. These are all just institutions gone mad, institutions that depend upon us for their existence. The men and women engaged in misdirecting these institutions need to be brought up short and forced to face their actual board of directors. And here is the first piece of information they all need to receive: there are no 14th Amendment citizens in America. That political status, to the extent that it ever existed, vanished in 1907 along with the corporation that created it. Negro Americans are state citizens just like everyone else now, and so are Native Americans. Their nationality is determined by the ground upon which they were born and the soil that their bodies derive from, and no corporate charter can say otherwise. No policy of trying to create unconscionable contracts with babies will stand, and neither will the rest of the horse dung being promoted as an excuse to justify commercial feudalism. We threw off feudalism, colonial feudalism, and now, commercial feudalism. If we have to make it clear for a third time that we will not tolerate this, we won't bother blaming and fighting Iranians for you, we will just bomb London and Rome and Brussels and be done with the entire epicenter of this global scourge. As for us being citizens of the United States, voluntarily and knowingly subjecting ourselves to a commercial contact offered by FDR, that's a stinking pile of horse dung, too. He wasn't addressing Americans in an inauguration speech as U.S. President, and none of us were operating in commerce in 1933. Despite the gifts of corporate franchises being conferred upon us via unconscionable contracts, first by the Queen's government to kidnap and transport us illegally into territorial jurisdiction, and then being offered by the Queen as municipal slaves to the Pope, it's time to pay up for the breach of trust and fraud that the popes and the British monarchs and the members of Congress have been engaged in. The whole collective entity doctrine needs to be scrapped and consigned to the dustbin of history, along with the doctrine of discovery, and a lot of people in Westminster and Whitehall and Rome and Washington, D.C., need to be making haste to correct their sins. Or this time, they aren't going to be able to pass the blame on to someone else. Not the Germans. Not the Chinese. Not the Americans. Not the Iranians. Not the Russians. We've all had enough of your crap. It's time to get back in your box, the 10 miles square allotted to you. And stay there.